Greetings wherever you are in this universe. My name is Kaya Nyambi Shivers, and welcome to Arc Republic. Tonight I'm speaking with Dr. Sherice J. Nelson. How are you?
I'm doing good, girl. Doing good.
I thank you for joining me. Usually we meet about every, once or twice a month, but the times have called us to meet more regularly. The last time we talked about the Buffalo Massacre, which wasn't even on the agenda to speak, but you poured your heart out, and it was such a needed conversation to have. Unfortunately, now we are speaking again a little bit over like a week and a half later, and now we're talking about another mass shooting, this time in Uvalde or Uvalde, depending what your accent is, Texas, where a gunman, 18-year-old Salvador Rolando Ramos, goes into an elementary school, ends up shooting and killing 19 children, 2 adults, and there are about maybe 10 to 12 people who are injured in this melee, this catastrophe, that tragedy that has happened. We were talking last night, because we were supposed to speak last night, but we were talking about what will this show entail? And part of the concern for me as a media person was there's so much information flying around, and information is still being verified. At the same time, authorities and officials are holding a lot of the information with the explanation that there's an active investigation still going on. So I wanted to be very cognizant about not putting out erroneous information, even though as a media outlet, and this happens across the board, unfortunately, we did correct it. But in this one, I thought it was apropos that we kind of go through the chain of events that have been released and talk about it and critique it, because, there's still a lot, in my opinion, there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered, as well, the political conversation and discourse going around these. So bear with me if I'm a little slow tonight, because I'm very intentional in what I say. I don't want to upset any more people than people already are. I know that's not preventable, but I do thank you for sending me this timeline, because that was one of our concerns. We hadn't had a timeline of events.
Yeah, and I guess I would just like to start by saying, as a mother of a 9-year-old Black son.
Wow.
It just brought me back to Sandy Hook, because I was pregnant with my son during Sandy Hook. Mm-hmm. And I remember telling his father, I'm scared because I don't think they have the politics to get changed legislation at the federal level. And I said this to him earlier on, and I was in my PhD program at Howard at the time. And I said, I'm scared because if legislators will not be forward acting when it comes to a group of white children, then what can I expect when it comes to protecting my Black son that's in this womb? And I think the piece that continues to churn for me is that this loss of life, I think we are not talking about the racial element to this loss of life. And the fact that this loss of life is a now string of racial incidents, one in Buffalo, one in Southern California, and now one in that's basically on the border in Texas, right? 60 miles from the border of the Mexican border in Texas. And so it just raises my awareness and makes me very nervous and frightened as a mother of a 9-year-old Black boy in school, who's still in school and will be in school until about mid-June. The other thing that really, I think, before we even get into the timeline, and you and I have spoken about this as an educator myself.
Right.
HBCUs, have seen heightened threats. We got another threat during graduation.
Really?
Yeah, that we, that
a bomb threat.
Yeah, we got another. Well, they kept it quiet. They didn't really want to identify it, but there was increased security. We got, emails about increased security. The local news talked about increased security, and anytime you get that much security, and it was very prevalent during graduation, then you know that there's been some level of threat. And I have friends that are in leadership at in the higher education apparatus at Southern, who did confirm that there was another threat, that the FBI had actually researched the threat and they knew that it wasn't an active threat, if that makes sense. But that just happened, during graduation, which was May 14th, and HBCUs across the country, right, saw these threats. And so for me, it is the racial undertone and the brewing. And we know that once it gets warm, right, they call them hot summers or red summers, that, I'm very nervous about the carnage that we will see this summer. And so that is kind of been the thing that's been rapidly on my mind as more and more information comes out, are those two things. One, as a mother of a Black son, and then two, as an educator, what does this look like for me teaching at a predominantly Black institution?
As an educator, and at this time of the year, us working in, at universities, it's the time of the year where you have every flunky student and their mothers, because yes, the parents do intervene sometimes, making these emboldened, disrespectful statements in their emails about why they didn't get this grade, why they feel they should get this grade. And this year, it has a lot of professors, including myself, on edge in terms of how does this response affect or impact the student, and how will they respond?
Yes.
So that has been the conversation, the dialogue across the board for all professors, students, teachers. And, we're coming off of a pandemic where a lot of people in the educational field felt as if they were abandoned and their needs were not met. This is perhaps the straw that breaks the camel's back in terms of, do we really care about our educational system? Do we really care about our children? This, I think, is what really, people, especially when we go over the timeline of events and what happens. But I also want to say, I have to add the Brooklyn subway shooter to this timeline. So you have 4 mass shootings taking place in 4 different ways, right? So you have public transportation, I think a community center, a grocery store, now you have a school. Nobody is safe. And all of these have, because the subway shooter, they talked about his background, have racialized components about that. And we've spoken about this racial climate that has been brewing, and now it's come to, in my opinion, it's boiling over. And so this summer is, people are talking about how to keep your home safe, how to act in the public. Even speaking to my family members who have, children of age who want to work, they're like, I don't think I want, because these are the kids that work at the grocery stores, at the retail centers. People are like, I don't want my children to work if I don't feel like they're safe. So there's a lot of conversation around that, including, and maybe we should talk about this before we go into the timeline, the political cultural discourse around these shootings and the history of violence in the United States. So I'll let you start with that one, because you said something very profound to me.
Yeah, and so, but even beyond, well, before we attack, I think the violence piece, I think that folks have to understand that democracy is just an idea. And that if you get a heterogeneous, meaning a mixed population, to stop believing in the idea that it is okay to sacrifice for a greater good and to see each other as enemies, then you are eroding the tenets on which democracy sits. And I say that because that to me is directly then connected to how then this country starts. And why do I say that? I've talked about this book quite often, but it's called 13 Clocks. And it is to signify the 13 colonies of the United States and how all of these clocks have to strike at just the right time for us to get these United States of America. And one of the ways that that was done really was then by vilifying Native Americans and blacks, and then vilifying them, then perpetuated and made okay violence against them, in the hope that they could get these 13 colonies, these 13 clocks to strike all at the same time to make the union that we understand it to be today. And so this country is built on white violence. And if we get to even before the creation of these 13 colonies, we have to think about the level of violence and devastation used to then take over Native American lands. The violence that was used as far as subduing Black people inside of slavery. We have to think about the violence that was used in a terror-like fashion to then ensure that not only once the slave trade stopped, that slavery would be a permanent economic center for Southern culture and life because of the level of terror. We have to think about the level of violence that has been systematically brought inside of the system through through Black codes first, and then through Jim and Jane Jim Crow laws, right? Jim and Jane Crow laws. We have to think about the level of violence when it comes to interracial marriage. We have to think about the level of violence that has consistently permeated this country, and is really in many ways the foundation in which this country is built. And I said very publicly on Twitter last night that one of the biggest reasons that white men in particular are hell-bent on grabbing their guns and keeping the Second Amendment is because deep down they know that without those guns and without that permission of violence, that their dominance is over. And the decline of that dominance has been seen historically when they do not have superior force.
Those are some excellent. That's an excellent perspective to start about. You know, I've been saying all day, violence is in the DNA of the United States. And so you gave an excellent rundown. I want to include the labor movements in the United States were very violent, and in order to establish them. But when non-white people, right, communities of color, attempt to enter into the labor unions, then violence is enacted upon them, right? And all of the wars and the international wars that the United States has had with other countries, ironically, in the name of democracy, right? So these, you know, what we are seeing is a manifestation of a culture that has existed for as long as the 13 colonies. I really like that. That was a really great analysis, or for me, epitome of hegemony. The idea of hegemony is it's a recalibration of power. Power is not static. You cannot rule with bayonets like the 13 colonies. So you always have to recalibrate this power. And part of it is, okay, I'm the person in power. Sometimes I need to sit back and allow those who I'm over flex or do what they got to do so I can understand where they are. And then I come with the whammy and smack them down. And I, you know, in order to maintain my power. And also part of hegemony is to present this illusion that there is equal or equitable buy-in across the board. And that is actually the desire. So that's a really excellent entryway. I have been at the same time, especially when I speak to another contributor, Africa, who talks a lot about white dominance and control or white power structure. You know, we often have to talk about those who are not phenotypically white that play a pivotal and critical part in maintaining it, like a Herschel Walker. And those who are not as, bold as a Herschel Walker. But
well, before and this is just a shameless plug. I am the originator of a theory called insulated blackness that explains right the why people that are phenotypically Black, why are they a part of this apparatus to then uphold whiteness and to center it? And in that theoretical framework, I basically argue, and it's in the Politics, Groups, and Identities Journal, and it was co-authored by Tim Lewis, he and I. And it is this idea that if you have not experienced enough racial discrimination, then there is no way that you are then going to see then the centering of whiteness or the white supremacist structure that is then permeated this country. There's no way you can see it if you have not experienced it. And a Herschel Walker, for all intents and purposes, since being the poster child for the University of Georgia, has not had to experience that phenomenon, and has no problem in many ways being the token Negro in centering whiteness. I do not believe in any stretch of the means that he doesn't understand that he is a token. He in fact actually celebrates the fact that he's a token, and that's all because of what he believes his skills and abilities have been insulated him from the pain of what it means to be phenotypically Black in this country, and I would argue around the world.
Yeah, that's some really good points. Maybe Herschel Walker has not understood what it has meant to be Black in a very long time, but I know he's had some early experiences and probably some experiences now. I don't know what the psychological, I forgot because I did know it, but the psychological, the cognitive dissonance that goes into him disassociating himself, from Black experiences, because I know they clown him. All right, we know that. We know they clown him.
Yes.
So and before we go on, I have to say, offer my deepest sympathies to the community, the parents, the family members, the friends, and the community who is in serious pain, hurt, and confusion about what went on. Right. Wow. Do you want to talk about the Beto O'Rourke incident now? Or you want to table that? Yeah.
Well, I think that Beto as a parent, so I think there's a few lenses here that I think that people are not that I think the mass media is kind of painting over or trying to say that this was a politically staged outburst. And some of the evidence I think doesn't necessarily speak to that. So one of the things that the mainstream media is saying is that, somebody held his seat and he came to the press conference late. Well, if you watch the clip, that's not actually the case. He got to the press conference when it started, and he was with a group of people, which people now know to be his staffers that were working with him. And that's not uncommon, right? For your
especially
staffers.
especially for this type of incident.
Yeah.
I worked for a congressperson and there would be staff there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. And then the idea that they held his seat, if you go look at the clip, I mean, the auditorium was fairly wide open. They didn't need to hold a seat for him because he could have really sat anywhere. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that the whole he interrupted. I don't necessarily agree with the whole interruption because he let the governor completely finish speaking before he approached the podium and did not let the lieutenant governor speak, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I can see the level of political theater, but the whole idea that he interrupted him in the middle of what he had to say and it caused a scene, I don't think that that's quite as accurate. Number two, I think the thing is that, and you and I have talked about this, is that if you're trying to make a political stunt, you're going to make sure that the cameras hear what you're saying. And most of what he said directly was inaudible. I mean, it has taken folks to listen to the clip 12 times and write, context underneath it, right? If you go back and look at the clip, it's difficult to even hear what he said. And you and I both know political theater only works well if you find a hot mic and you speak into it. I think the next thing is that the civil way in which he did it, right? He said what he had to say and then walked out. And then his concern was to speaking then to Latin American families, right? To speaking to Hispanic or Latino or Latina, the community, right? He came out and started speaking in Spanish to them about why he did what he did. And so much so that someone in the crowd, if folks watch, asked him, hollered out, "Speak English," right? Because the mainstream media wanted to be able to capture it, but he wasn't speaking in a language that most of their audience members spoke. And so he stopped speaking Spanish, right? And spoke in English. And to me, that was another, I think another point of, I'm tired, right? And then he goes and then delineates every shooting since he's ran for the governorship that has happened in Texas. And I think that's what moved me the most, right? The way that he was able to recollect, right? Each of those incidents, where he was, what he was thinking about, the ages of his children, where his children are going to school. And I just felt, I guess, a connection as a parent. So yes, it definitely has the value of political theater, if that makes sense. It definitely has the value. But I think as a parent, as someone that's, Latinx adjacent, or fully Latino, depending how you view him or see him, that there's a level of frustration, right? That he's at, especially because he knows that after the last mass shooting, they actually took away concealed gun permit. I mean, they made it even more accessible. It made it more easy to get guns. And I think living that reality in a place where you've been inside of the government, right, and you've been and know many of these people, it gets exhausting after a while to watch them, play puppet with other people's lives. And so I don't think that it doesn't have political theater value. It definitely does. But I truly believe that it was out of a place of exhaustion. It was a place of how much more do we need to take, right? The same way that Steve Kerr was like, "I'm not talking about basketball. I'm not talking about basketball. This is what I'm going to use my podium time for," and then walks off, right? You're not going to be able to ask me anything else. And I think in many ways, the fact that Beto didn't stay around and look for a whole bunch of media attention, he said what he had to say and then left, and spoke to me a lot to I think the level of exhaustion he feels, and I think a lot of Texans feel about this, because people don't realize they just had a mass shooting in 2018 at a Walmart. I mean, this has just been 4 years for them, having such a loss of life, really in participating in a mundane activity.
What I did see the clip, and I guess somebody, now the audio of him when he's talking directly to the people on the podium has come out, and I'm paraphrasing what he said is that, you choose to basically turn about or embolden basically these actions by not really taking action. I'm totally paraphrasing that. It all is, even if it's not intentional political theater, it's all part of political theater.
It
right?
is.
So I mean, that's the first thing. As an elected official, you're supposed to do that. You actually are supposed to stand out, and you're supposed to, if you need to disrupt in order for what it is you have to say, then you disrupt. So the part of you're out of line, it was comical to me, because the press conference was honestly a run-of-the-mill thing where they are.
It was a circus.
I cannot use the words I want to say, but it was
a circus to me. It was a complete circus, because why is Ted Cruz center stage in that shot, right?
Right.
Why is Ted Cruz? Why? Because the NRA is having their annual event in the coming weeks in Houston, and Governor Greg Abbott and Ted Cruz are speakers at that event, right? Why is the lieutenant governor given a chance to speak instead of the police that are leading the investigation, right? Why go through all of these quote unquote law enforcement agencies that are working in an investigation, why wouldn't you have them then speak, right? And many of these types of incidents that we see all the time, right? In Buffalo, what did you see? You saw the political leadership talk, and then they turned it over then to law enforcement to talk. Why are we turning it over to the lieutenant governor to talk at all, right? So to your very point, it was a circus to me to have all those people lined up there, and many of the people that are lined up are not able to speak on the matter and don't play any active role in getting to the bottom of what happened that day.
And to add to that, at this point, there's a script in these type of high profile cases. People get on who are the heads or representations of law enforcement or, like the mayor or whatever, and they all basically applaud all of the work, the hard work that the law enforcement agencies do. People don't want to hear that. Their babies died. They don't care about the comical thing is that what we understand is that the law enforcement at the scene were doing some absolute nonsense. People don't. So for me, Beto O'Rourke disrupted that. Was like, we're not going to do this today. Parents want answers. And from what it is I understand, a lot of parents wanted to come into the press conference and they were not even allowed to come into the press conference. So at this point, you have elected officials, you have law enforcement. These are people who are all paid by our tax dollars, cannot be held accountable. Like, who are you? Who are you? And then to tell O'Rourke, you're out of line. I'm gonna tell you, if that NRA meeting is happening in 2 weeks, Houston, get ready. Because Houston, we gonna have a problem. The one thing I know about living in a Black and Latino community in LA, you from Oakland.
Right.
Let me tell you about them Latinos and them and theirs. You don't mess with them and theirs. They're very family oriented. They're like, look, we work, we do what we gotta do. You killed their children? All right, we're gonna see how this play out. Okay. And I know enough about the Latino community to have that respect. I will not be surprised if they don't show up at that NRA in absolute phenomenal numbers, especially being in Texas, which is a heavily Latino population. But there's not only are there going to be answers, but there's going to be consequences and repercussions. Trust, best, and believe that. So yeah. So it was part of it, but it was needed. It was definitely needed as people are across the country wanting answers.
I guess I didn't think about it like that because he's not a sitting, right? He's not a sitting state rep. He's not, sitting. And what I think that you're really pointing out here, in many ways, thinking about the fact that folks weren't able to be let in, had his staffers not already been inside, would he have even been allowed to come in? Right. I think that's another wrinkle. I think that I didn't even take into consideration or think about until you said that. And we know I knew that the parents weren't allowed in, right? But I did not think about the fact that they weren't let in and he was, and what then that means for the expectation that in many ways those parents had of him who was allowed into the prison.
And him speaking Spanish was very intentional. That is, I remember in the 80s, there was more Spanish speaking, and there was this flip. And the idea for the growing Spanish speaking population is we are going to communicate in the language in which we're familiar with because it's not going to be demonized anymore. So it's a very political act.
Yeah,
performance,
but to your very point though, about when he came out, he didn't go to the media. He went back to those parents. Mm-hmm. Like to your, but I didn't even put that together, if that makes sense. Like I didn't think about it that way until you presented that. That's who he went to go talk to, if that makes any sense, which is why he's speaking Spanish, because that's the language that they're more comfortable. And then you watch the news, if that makes any sense, run the news cameras, then run to him while he's speaking Spanish, and then they holler out to him, speak English, right? but I didn't even think about that nuance, if that makes sense, right?
Mhm.
That political nuance, the fact that when he came out of the press conference, he went directly back to those parents, right?
Mhm.
That I didn't even think about the fact that one of the biggest reasons he probably went directly back to them is to talk to them because he was let in and they weren't.
And I really added to what you're saying, this I think is going to change the political dynamics heavily in Texas, in terms of getting more Latino folk who can vote to vote, or getting them, if they cannot, getting them more politically active, right? Because
Yeah.
this is Black folk have been called a sleeping giant for a long time to a certain degree, but we push a lot of the voting. Latinos are now considered the sleeping giant. So this would be really to see what this shift looks like, because there is going to be a response.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is
Yeah.
definitely going to be a response. And so he's also doing that to position himself, because he ran for the governor.
He ran for governor of the state of
And
Texas
yes,
against Greg Abbott and narrowly lost.
narrowly lost. And so now, let me tell you, they're about to put some money in that bank. Oh, yeah. So this is a really interesting issue, right? So let's go over this timeline. We're not going to
Yes.
go over everything. And let me say this before we move into this timeline. Let me emphasize this. Information about the shooter and the events are still coming out.
Yes.
We might have information that has been given to us as folk in the public and as press members that might change, because what we are for sure of is that people have been covering up some stuff. And there's so much chaos and confusion that the story is still unfolding. So I have to say that. So please bear with us. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to Arc Republic. If you like what you see and you like what you hear, you can actually keep this mothership going. How? You can make a tax-deductible donation in several ways. One, Cash App us at Arc Republic Media. And you can also go on our website, arcrepublic.com/donate. As well, you can also donate to our fiscal sponsor and our sister organization at Black Farmers Index, that is Cash App, or also go onto their website, blackfarmersindex.com. We are two Black women-owned media organizations who share our profits so folk can thrive. Let's start with what we know about the shooter. What I've read. What do you know about him?
So what we do know about the shooter is that he came to live with his grandmother, his 66-year-old grandmother, back in, I think it's March of
end of March.
At the end of March of this year. We don't know if he was in school. We don't know where he lived previously. We don't know because if he's 18, right, and shortly 18, right, or this idea that he bought these guns shortly after his 18th birthday. Well, what was he doing before then, I think, is the biggest question, right? Because what we got out of the Buffalo shooter is we knew where he was from. Mm-hmm. We knew he drove 200 miles. I mean, we knew those things fairly quickly. It has now been 48 hours, and this kid is almost like a ghost until he shows up and supposedly, buys these guns after his 18th birthday. That is still kind of rocky, right? So we know about the shooter, that in March that he went to live with his grandmother. We also know that he had a Facebook, or that he had some social media posts on Facebook. What I find to be problematic about that, I think, is as an educator, first off, Facebook was made when I was in undergrad. And it was really made, and I remember back in the day when Facebook required you to have a college email address even to participate in Facebook. So I say all that to say that Facebook is probably one of the oldest social media platforms that still exists today. Not the oldest one that ever existed, because there was MySpace and Black Planet and all those other things. But one that is still thriving today. It's one of the oldest. And the chair of my department and I joke and say, after kids graduate from undergrad, then they get a Facebook, right? So the idea that an 18-year-old would be that active or active at all on Facebook, to me is kind of,
Good point.
It's kind of to begin with, because I know my students, most of my students that I interface with are either on Twitter or Instagram, and they're also on
TikTok.
TikTok. I don't fool with TikTok, but the idea that, you know, Facebook is the outlet he decided to use is kind of suspect to me as well. We also know that there is unaccounted ammunition, right? We know that he bought a certain high magazine rounds.
Yeah, they were like something like
375 rounds.
75, yes.
Yeah, 375 rounds. But there's still some question about a lot of these rounds. And one of the reasons that there's a lot of questions about the purchase of these rounds and where from is because although ammunition is not tracked, all ammunition has a serial number on it, and they're having a difficult time. And this is not being said publicly, but this is what I know as a political scientist who has, you know, studied war in many cases. If they're having a hard time pinning down the serial numbers for some of this ammunition, right? Which is why there's a confusion, right? Where they were able to name one of the grocery stores where he was able to, or one of the stores is called the McCraw, where he bought some of the ammunition. Oh, I'm sorry, it's the Oasis Outback. I'm looking right here. The Oasis Outback is where he bought a certain amount of the semi-automatic rifle and some of the rounds. But there's another set of rounds that they haven't released where he's gotten them from. And that's always suspicious to me, because that means there either was no serial number on those weapons, on that ammunition, or they haven't been able to identify or match up where those serial numbers come from, if that makes sense. And it's the same way, if I want people to think about it this way so that people don't think that they're like tracking ammunition. It's the same way that your VIN on your car identifies the car, if that makes sense. You think about it that way. Don't think about it like, oh, they're tracking the serial numbers of ammunition. No. They just know, the same way with your cereal, right? Has anybody ever gotten a box of cereal that doesn't taste that good, and then they'll ask you, what's the lot number and all that, and those numbers on that box let them know what plant that box of cereal came out of, et cetera, et cetera.
When it was manufactured.
When it was manufactured, they'll be able to, what we call a chain of, what they call in law, like a chain of custody. They'll know, you know, based upon those numbers, where it moved, how many times it moved. And I remember this, I was like, man, this is serious. You know, this one lady says, oh yeah, we've gotten complaints about that lot because it sat next to some detergent. And the detergent, I guess, seeped into the being too close.
Yeah,
you can taste the detergent in the cereal, because I called about it, and so that opened my eyes to, oh my gosh, like,
oh wow, yeah.
She was able to tell me the lot number, the everything, the incident, where, and she just filed another incident report. And I called General Mills. The same thing with Frito-Lay, right? I know people that worked in the plant down in Frito-Lay in Florida. So I don't want to get people, I don't want to give misinformation like you say all the time. I want to make it clear that numbering is really so that it can be tracked, quote unquote, but for they to understand like the chain of custody of how it moves. So that's the other piece of that this is kind of, you know, we know fuzzy. That he bought.
Yeah.
We don't know where a lot of these bullets even came from.
Right. So let me say this. Let me kind of add something in terms of the background before he even purchases it. Is that in my I mean, these are, you know, so many articles have come up.
Right.
But I'm actually, there was a video of a kid from Uvalde High School who said that he knew Salvador Ramos, and that Salvador Ramos was a bully. And that he would often antagonize students, but students would laugh at him. They wouldn't take him seriously. So according to this thing, he was a student. And I said, well, I mean, I used to work in K through 12, but I am unfamiliar of a K through of a school admitting a student at the end of March when you graduate in May. And what grade was he in? Certainly not a senior, but I was like, isn't that too late in a school year to admit a student? That was very interesting. Yeah, so I thought that was really, that was, to me, it was like, you know, I don't know about all these things, right? But what we know a lot, especially in immigrant communities, there's a lot of in terms of paperwork and documentation. And not saying I don't know where Salvador Ramos was born, but that is an immigrant community. It's a border community. So you have a lot of transient folk, coming in and out. So maybe they have a different policy because they are at the border. So I just that was something that I thought was, interesting, and it kind of did not add up. So that's
yeah. And so we understand that this starts at 11 a.m. They're reporting that this starts at 11 a.m. And that and then again, right? Let's also be clear that much of this information from a timeline has been extracted from what was said at that press conference. Right.
And we're using, let's just say, we're using the ABC News timeline.
We're using the ABC News timeline, right? But again, ABC has come up with this timeline based upon what I feel like is a very suspect press conference, right? Because when I was talking with my husband about this last night, who is a military officer, I said, when they usually do these press conferences, there's a board, they're pointing to the board where so-and-so came in at this time, like none of that was done. And now I feel like many in the media are they're scrambling, trying to understand or figure out what happened or to report based upon a preponderance of different stories, if that makes sense.
Right. And this is what I was trying to explain to, because, we had a story and we actually had a wrong photo. And so of the elementary school, and I was explaining to the person, I said, as a press member, it's been a very frustrating process, because when we as press, when this happens, we immediately, there are research skills that we have, that we look at stuff in databases. This person was absolutely scrubbed. His digital footprint is not present, with the exception of what looks like I don't know if this is a mug shot or a school shot or whatever this is, and then him holding a gun. Just as a, just sitting back, just as a common person, I said, out of all the photos you could have of him, only these two photos. As well, I want to say, with the Facebook correspondence, he doesn't post it publicly. It's actually a private text-to-text message that he sends. So it wasn't even public. And as of late, what has come out is that he, in his, what he's doing or what he was planning to do, according to the reports, somebody who's identified as CC, some German teenager, they say, he sent some type of correspondence to this person. And then when all these things happen, they contact authorities. So,
and I think it's very suspicious that the fact that we even know the national origin of the teenager.
Right. Good. Excellent point.
Why would the descriptive narrative of German be necessary in describing who this is, right? So that then to me raises more eyebrows, right? About, why German? Why wouldn't, because for all intents and purposes in the United States, a German person would pass for white, right? So
right. No, this is somebody, he reached out to someone in Germany.
Wow.
That's what they're saying, that this person is actually living in Germany, and they have this correspondence.
If that's the case, that makes it worse. So, yeah. Why, and I'm not saying that that's not the case. I'm saying that I find it odd that a Hispanic teenager living in the States is going to reach out to a German teenager to say, I shot my grandmother, I'm going to shoot an elementary school. So
right, forge this, and according to the reports, they've been in conversation for only a couple of months. This is really
right, and it just causes a lot of questions, right? It's not the idea that something nefarious is happening or has happened. It's the idea that it causes far more questions that then make you far more cynical about the information that you are getting.
That's correct.
And so the next thing we know is that about 11:30, 11:29, or 11:30, the police received this 911 call about a crash of a car and shots are fired. Well, this is to me another piece of the odd puzzle, because, and this is something my husband and I talked about as well, is that was then the elementary school just a was just an opportunity target, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it because you crashed close to this school, now you've decided on this school because you're heavily armed? Was there another target and then you just settled on the elementary school because you've now crashed this vehicle?
But according to reports, he said that he was in this text message. He said he was going to shoot his grandmother, and then he was going to an elementary school.
Right, a elementary school. It may
but
not have
which
been that
one? But they didn't identify which one. That is correct.
Right. So he may have been on his way to an elementary school, but not that one, right? We don't know. We've seen pictures of this vehicle, but we don't know how far this vehicle is from the actual elementary school. If shots were fired, how long did it take, right? In many ways, because you have to remember, this school is 60 miles from the border. You have U.S. border folks, kids that are at that school. You have, and we know that one of the deputy sheriff's daughter's life was taken in that school, right? So we're talking about law enforcement from federal, state, and local whose children attend this school, right? And so that to me then causes a whole nother set of questions, because if this is a
good point.
If this is a school that, because we don't know how far this crash was from
the house, right?
From the house, or even from the crash from the school. They just keep saying it's near. But if you look at the pictures, it's almost like a ditch. The school doesn't look anywhere close to then where, and you would have to then be able to have an aerial shot to really understand that. So, but they're being very intentional of not like show. I guess my thing is, I've seen media so long in my life. Normally they'll say the crash site was here and the person ran from here to here. Like, we are not seeing any of that.
There's no graphics. There's no schematics that kind of, at all. Another thing I wanted to say is that I read in another report, he moved to his grandmother's house from his mother, who he said had, but the reports say had an addiction issue, and he wasn't on good terms with his mother. I forgot to add that. But to your point, in terms of him taking his grandmother, I think the grandmother's name is Cecilia Gonzalez, taking the grandmother, and he lives with, it's not just his grandmother, the grandfather is somewhere in the picture too, because they quote the grandfather. He flees this scene. He takes the grandmother's car, flees the scene, crashes into this ditch, shoots 2 people at a funeral home, and then proceeds to go towards the elementary school. I just wanted to add that.
No. These are great pieces. And so then they say that he gets to the school about 11:32, right? So he gets to the school at 11:32 and starts shooting while he's outside of the school. Now, this is where, for me, these gun lobbyists and all the folks who say that we need more guns is problematic. Because if someone's shooting outside the school and you have law enforcement present, then why wasn't he apprehended and then taken down outside the school? Now, people have, when I've had this conversation throughout the day, they've said to me, well, the same thing in Buffalo, he shot people outside. Yeah, but there are not people outside of the grocery store in the parking lot that are law enforcement. The officer, or the former officer that was shot inside of the grocery store in Buffalo, was inside of the grocery store. He was by himself as the security officer, who was a retired Buffalo police officer. So there wasn't anybody there. So that's one piece. The second piece is, if this school is 60 miles from the border with a host of law enforcement kids that attend there, that school is already on high surveillance just because of its proximity to the border and whose kids go there. So this whole idea that he couldn't have been apprehended or he couldn't have been assailed outside of the school is also problematic to me in this timeline, because if he got to shooting outside the school, why was he able to get inside the school and then take so much life, if that makes sense?
Right. Well, Sherice, what has come out is that the initial report of him engaging in a law enforcement officers, first it was he exchanged some type of, they said engaged, that's what they said. He engaged with law enforcement officers. That was the first thing. Then it was reduced to he engaged in a law enforcement officer because there is a security guard at the school and wounded the security guard, thus got entry into the place. And then it was revealed that the security guard wasn't even there. He just walked into the school. That's the latest. People been lying. So that's so this, you know what I'm saying? So this is what I'm saying. People are covering up. This is a huge cover up. No, the security guard, nobody has mentioned where this person is, be it a man or a woman, nor has the security guard's whereabouts been accounted for. So this is how he could just walk into a school, because he literally walked into the school.
And from what we understand, according to the ABC timeline, it wasn't even the front door. It was on the west side of the campus, which means he came in, you know, but again, my problem
right, through an unlocked door, right?
Through an unlocked door. My problem with any and all of it still is if he shot in the parking lot there and they're on lockdown protocol, then why is that door open anyway? Because if you're on lockdown protocol, because you've heard, because I substitute taught in the K-12 system, and I've been a part of one of those lockdowns, to the case that they were very upset with me because they said that I got the kids all scared and riled up, and I said I would prefer to have them riled up and scared than dead. And you know, we had a back and forth about it, and like, you know, being from the hood, right, I'm in the classroom, we were in portables and with an attached building, and I'm in the classroom and I hear, if that makes any sense, I hear like screeching tires. Now when you're from the hood, you know what screeching tires means. It means a chase.
Yes.
Right? It means
or a drive-by or something.
Or a drive-by. You know that it means danger. Period, point blank. So I immediately get my kids out of the area, because we were the classroom I was in was the second most vulnerable classroom, because we were the portable right on the inside. So what I'm saying to you is that I've been in these experiences myself to know that why is that door still open if you on lockdown protocol, right? So now he gets into the elementary school, right? He's gotten
and let me say this before you go to that. I mean, even me being in high school back in the early 90s, which was the height of gang activity. And I recall I probably must have been in the 9th grade, maybe the 10th grade, but I know one of my siblings was there. My sister was there, maybe perhaps my brother was there at the time. But there was a nearby, there was shooting in close proximity to the school. And at the time I was in PE, and the PE, you're in the PE field, so it's open. They locked all the doors and you could not, people were trying to get into the school. Nobody could get access. They lock it down. And this is back in the 90s. This is not a new tactic, people. You know what I'm saying? This is something that has been implemented for a very long time. So I wanted to emphasize that as well. And I've been in subsequent lockdowns as a K through, I don't know if actually as a high school, then I become a substitute teacher at the high school student. They had lockdowns then because of what happened. So I just wanted to add to your point.
Right. So then they say, according to the timeline, at 11:43, the elementary school puts on Facebook that they're under lockdown procedures. But then at 11:44, they say he walks inside of the classroom. So I'm like, if you put on Facebook that you're in lockdown procedures, now this is what I know for a fact. What I know for a fact is when we went into lockdown procedures, we all had walkies. Everybody gets to shutting everything down. The administration, they're the last thing that happens is then the Facebook post. that's something that's either happening simultaneously or very much at the end. It is not the first thing on educators' minds is to post something on social media about a lockdown.
That's an excellent point. Okay? I mean, yeah, that's an excellent point.
Because
by this time, the police should have been there.
Exactly. And what I'm telling you is by the time you put this on social media, law enforcement should already be on this. So what I'm saying to you is I'm still not understanding. It's still not making a lot of sense to me because I've been in one of these situations where we've had an active shooter. And I'm telling you, I've watched administrators who have been trained. We have, since Columbine, we have normalized this. And instead of kids going through, like I did, bomb drills or earthquake drills, what I did getting underneath my desk or a bomb threat, right? Because there was, nuclear warfare for those Gen Xers who went to school during the Cold War times. You got underneath your desk and did that drill. Our kids are doing active shooter drills once a quarter, right? Because that's in many ways, and especially in some areas, a part of their federal funding is that they have to go on record of doing these active shooter drills. So what I'm saying to you is there's been lots of practice at this point. And if you are a school that's 60 miles from the border, you best believe they've been doing it more often than other people. Okay?
Oh yeah, that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. And hold on, we're talking about a school full of cops kids. And one thing we know about children of my father-in-law is a former cop, right? And so they're always, it's a hyper sensitivity to safety, right? So you always, and also my father, who was always was like, do this, do that. So, you had a whole bevy of parents who are definitely about the safety of their children prior to. You make some excellent points.
Then this is the next thing that they said at 11:44, he comes down this hallway and gets into a classroom that's opened in the middle, which means that this is a shared classroom. Now, this is the next piece because I've been in one of these events. In the shared classroom, that is the most vulnerable classroom, and the principal or whoever is on those two teachers the most, because that is the place where they're the most, because think about it,
the most vulnerable.
They're the most vulnerable. Because the idea is if you get locked down, it is turn the light, it's lock your door, turn your lights off, get every kid underneath the desk, get them to be quiet. Those are the directives. So the classroom that has most likely those accordion doors that are sharing across, they have even a different set of protocols when you're in that classroom, because it is where you get the most amount of damage. So my thing is, he picks out the classroom.
How does he know the classroom?
How does he know that's the classroom? Unless he had an intended target in mind, right? So that's where they say that we get this carnage, right? At 11:44, he gets into this particular classroom. That's a shared classroom, which is why 2 teachers died, because they were in this essentially shared classroom that was split up by the accordion doors. Well, then we get this huge kind of gap.
So let me say this. According to the reports, that one of the teachers is calling the police.
One of the teachers is calling 911.
Right, exactly. Right. Sorry, excuse me. It's calling 911. And then she gets shot. She gets shot. Okay, so how does this happen, right? I mean, we know how this happens, but I thought that was really this was really interesting. I really want to know who is giving this information, because the teachers are dead. Is it the children that are giving the information?
No, according to this report, it says the name, let me give you the name, because it does have a name here. Who is this? This is, oh my goodness. Mr. McGraw. So McGraw.
Who is Mr. But this is somebody that is not at the scene.
This is somebody that's not at the scene.
Right. That's what I'm talking. Yeah. So let's just say, to your point, when we go into an emergency situation like this, the front office or desk should already have called 911. An
Correct.
Emergency responder should. So why is the teacher calling 911?
Right. Unless it hasn't been communicated to the teacher that that 911 hasn't been called, which
right.
then to me speaks to the failure of communication between administration and teachers. And what I'm saying to you is that I just view that as highly unlikely at a school that's 60 miles from the border of Mexico.
Mhm.
I was in California, in Vallejo, California, and we had walkies. And if none of us could get contacted, and that plays a role because we were in portables, but we had walkies.
Mhm.
If we couldn't be contacted on that walkie, somebody was coming to that classroom, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So to me, there's some other pieces that are missing about the level of communication, because as to your point, right, the school should have already called 911. And that then gets to my next point of 11:44, according to this timeline, is the he gets into this shared classroom. We don't have another time-stamped event till 12:17. That is 30 minutes. So you're telling me that's why we have 19 dead, is because you have an active shooter in a joint classroom, which also explains the age range of students, right? Because
Right,
that
from
means
second to fourth grade. Yeah,
different
yeah,
grades in this
Right.
or in this shared classroom space. So now you're telling me that for 30 minutes we are blind as to knowing what the hell happened?
Well, if we incorporate what we know now, those 30 minutes are more so likely 90 minutes, right? Because what is being reported is when the shooter goes into the classroom, officers go into the school, retrieve their children, and then stand outside. And it is this standstill for 90 minutes. Okay.
And the reason that the officers were able to get to their children, this is the other piece that people are not realizing, is because they had an award ceremony. So and this is the other piece that I don't feel like by people being said, well, the police went and got their kids, and no, they were able to go get them because they had literally just left the auditorium for an award ceremony for honor roll for these students.
So parents are in the building when this is going on.
Parents had just left the building, from what we understand, which is why they were outside demanding to get back inside the building.
Okay. And some of those parents were law enforcement officers who then went in and got their children and came out. So they weren't armed or anything. They were just going as civilian parents.
They were civilian parents who were there for a honor roll. And the reason I know this for a fact is they interviewed the deputy, the chief deputy whose daughter was lost, whose wife was livid because she kept saying, I left her, I shouldn't have left her. Because they had a picture literally minutes before from their daughter holding up the A and B honor roll certificate that she got. So that's something else that I feel like people are not understanding the nuance of. That's why the parents are so pissed, because I'm outside. They heard the shots that were fired in the parking lot. That's why parents are demanding to get back in the building that's now on lockdown, if that makes sense. And what I truly believe is that law enforcement parents who were then more savvy and understood the layout of the school and understood where particular breaches could have been, were able to get back in and get their kids, whereas the average parent is just there arguing. If that makes sense.
The average parent is thinking that the police are going to protect their children. That's another thing, right? Or at the very least, maybe they thought that the officer parents might help in what's going on.
Right, but that would also have assumed that they were armed. And that's
well, no, I'm not talking about the parents who are the officer parents who are coming as civilians, but I'm just saying a parent. So you know, there is culturally there's a respect for authority in Latin culture.
Yep.
And so if we talked about this and you brought up this really good point last night, it's a town. It's not a city. It's a town. It's 20,000 people. It's community oriented. A lot of folk know a lot of folk. People, you know, rear their children together. So there is, I think, and this is a town where you know the officers, where you by first name. So if you know the officers by first name, perhaps there was an expectation that they would, you know, do something, right? These parents who are not in law enforcement. not the, well,
I hear what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying? Twofold, right?
Yeah.
So,
but this is another piece of the puzzle that's not in this timeline that we also do know. Well, I know based upon watching MSNBC, was they interviewed the head surgeon for pediatrics at the hospital where the children were taken. I
saw that.
And she talked about something that played a huge role. And this again makes the timeline problematic. She says they heard it over the scanner by 11:30. She said by noon, her team was out in the parking lot with blood.
Whoa.
Right? Because in these mass casualty events, the often the difference of life and death is the ability to get a blood transfusion. And because of the incident that they had in 2018, that her team was already prepared and had sent blood. That by noon there was blood available for victims inside the parking lot, which also then makes this the fire department, the scanner traffic calls at 12:30 and they show up. The blood was there before the EMS showed up.
How does that happen?
How does that happen? Right. And that's what she reported, that by noon she had sent the team out there. Right. So, but the school system doesn't report on Twitter that there's a lockdown of 12/17.
Right.
The school put it on the Facebook at 12:30, right, or 11:40. But the consolidated school system didn't get it on the Twitter until 12:17. And the fire department doesn't show up to 12:30. But we have conflicting reports that the head surgeon of pediatrics who received these children sent blood by noon. All of this is not lining up, right? And it's not until, according to this timeline, till 12:45 that the tactical team is able to enter the school and then get a hold to then the shooter.
Well, so another thing there's been conversation about why was it necessary if there are already local police officers there, right? And they're heavily armed to the T, as we saw. Why was it necessary for a tactical team for border patrol to come and be the ones to take out the shooter? Do you have okay?
Now, so there's been many of I would say analysis on this point. Well, one that I appreciated the most, I think, was from a former law official, I think, who was on CNN last night in the lake, because I've been watching this pretty closely, and he said that usually the tactical team is called or to come in because the assessment has been made that regular officers do not have the training to subdue the suspect. So then that makes me question, well, then what made you think this, right?
Right. Exactly.
What made you then think that your current police force wasn't able to handle this? And my husband was the one who pointed it out to me. He said, you send SWAT in when someone's heavily armed and you don't think from a position that you're going to be able to take them, right? And some have argued maybe it was the fact that he had shot in the parking lot or whatever. But my thing is, somebody had to make the decision to send in a tactical team. And on what level of information did they have to make that assessment? And that to me is still very unclear as to why then the tactical team was necessary. And then if he's breached the campus at 11:30, 11:40, why is it essentially taking you an hour to be able to engage him and send a tactical team in at 12:45?
Well, according to what we know now, was 90 minutes before the tactical team comes in. And according to the parents, the tactical team or whomever they are move in only after parents have agreed to rush the school themselves, right? Because they were like, please, they were begging for somebody to go in there. And so I don't have it's a man, it's a father who's speaking to reporters saying that it was only until we said, forget it, we're going to rush the gun person, did they finally move. And there are reports stating that, now I don't know what agency did this, but they actually ran away from the gunfire in the exchange of gunfire. Right. So, and then I'm not for sure, they said that some officers were shot. I don't know if that still is the case. Yeah. So, I mean, there's so many unknowns and uncertainties.
And just in the timeline here, right? The timeline ends here with ABC News and this report at 11:06. Right. I'm sorry, at 1:06. When then the police announced police report that he's dead. Now, my next problem with that is, if you sent the tactical team, which is the U.S. Border Patrol, why is then the local police reporting his death?
Wow.
That's my problem with that. Why are the local police reporting his death at 1:06 p.m. when they're not the ones who subdued the gunman, right? Wow. Because from what we understand, he had barricaded himself in the classroom.
In the classroom.
Right. So my question is, and if that's the case, then why are local officials then being the ones to then report the death if then a U.S.
It becomes a federal,
team,
a federal agency takes over? That's an excellent
and what I'm
that's
saying,
an astute question.
Right, because I federalism is what I do, right? I'm a political science professor, and everybody then knows that then, based upon the supremacy clause inside of the Constitution, that once the feds take over, it's done. And many of your viewers will know this. You guys have watched Law and Order. You guys have seen, crime and cop shows where the locality doesn't want the feds to come in. Whether it's the FBI, the DEA, the ATF, whatever the three-letter name organization is, they know that once they get their hands on it, it's a wrap. So why in this report then they're the ones who killed him, but then local is reporting it?
Right, and but that's a really good point, because once the feds come in, they take over the whole investigation or whatever is going on, and then they lead everything.
And that's the next piece. What you mean by lead? Greg Abbott never said who was leading. He just named a whole host of law enforcement agencies.
That doesn't sit well. Yeah,
not by accident.
That doesn't sit well. The problem with 9/11 was the lack of communication between agencies. That was one of the issues, with the lack of communication, which is still a problem, is how people hold intel and, conduct investigations, and who owns and contributes that. And I know for certain, working on a case here in Jersey, is that when with the missing teen Josiah Moore, when the family called the feds because they felt local police weren't doing their jobs, according to the family, local police then enacted some reprisals against the family for doing
started targeting the family.
This is making them look bad. Right. So, that's some good points.
Yeah, and this is my last point, I think, to that piece is we don't know what federal agency, if a federal agency is leading the case, but what we do know, right, what we saw was someone from the U.S. Border Patrol is now doing a lot of the press, right? Which again is not consistent then with what the governor said at this press conference. The bigger thing, as you scratch and dig behind this, is what a criminologist said on CNN. It is going to be damn near impossible to figure out what happened in this crime scene because of all of the traffic, right? And the level of traffic, the level of different agencies, all of it has made it far more difficult than to be able to, from a forensic perspective, be able to kind of dissect what happened here. And to be honest with you, I believe that is purposeful. I think there's something else that's here. I don't know what, I really don't, but I think there's something else that's here because the timeline, the explanations, again, cause too many questions. They provoke too many more questions than they do provide answers.
Well, I mean, I guess in the investigation, what about the cameras? Where are all the cameras? Were there cameras in the school? Were there cameras on the officers' body armor. What about the cameras in the community? There's much more footage than we even have access to. So that's
right, but there's been reports that the Wi-Fi was down in the area, and the Wi-Fi
isn't that convenient?
Well, that's some of the report that, again, we're still getting lots of information from different pieces. And that's one of the pieces that, and I don't think they even said down. I think they said spotty, or basically saying that there was some level of interruption, or that there was possible interruption, right? That's been a piece. That's been a piece of it. And this is something that I've been complaining to AT&T about, and I don't know if AT&T owns the towers out there or not, but I explained to my husband, I said, one of the biggest reasons AT&T customers are seeing so many failures of calls, or the lack of getting kicked off the network or getting kicked off the cell towers, is because of the support we are sending to Ukraine, and for their ability then to communicate encrypted in an encrypted fashion. And if you got to create network space, right, for their encrypted communication, then those of us that are then, pedestrian cell phone users are going to then pay the price. So, we understand, and most people understand that are in the cellular world, that Verizon and AT&T dominate, that AT&T and Verizon dominate most of the towers, because they are the two big boys that broke up the Bell system. And so either one of the two of them had towers down in that area, and it got me immediately asking questions about this whole spotty piece. Is it because the cell towers,
so they hold the defense, basically they hold the defense budget?
Right. And if people think about this, most people who work for state agencies, or state or local agencies, AT&T or Verizon is your cell phone carrier, and the federal government only really uses Verizon. So that also immediately popped into my head. If I'm 60 miles from the border, which means that if I'm 60 miles from the border, it means that I have access to encrypted communication, and the idea of encrypted communication then being waned or leveraged because of our involvement in the Ukraine.
Yeah, well, that also makes sense, because this is years ago when Department of Homeland Security is created, and all of these
2013,
right, historic these things come out in terms of surveillance, and how AT&T is one of the agencies that's giving the information to the government, which let's say 15 years ago that was considered blasphemous in terms of privacy. But right. that all makes sense. Sherice, this has been an eye-opener. You have really dug into this. I thank you for really looking at this and breaking this down. I was sitting here and just kind of blown away. If you want a case to be solved, ask a Black woman. Please do. I'm sitting here as a student listening to this blow by blow and this playback of events. So where are we now with what's going on? Do you know? Like what is it?
To me, we're still really in the same place. Yes, we have more information as far as whereabouts or whatever, but again, I'm just becoming more and more skeptical of of the information that we're getting, and not because I think people are necessarily being nefarious or lying, but because of what the criminologist said. The chain of evidence, the crime scene, all of it has been so saturated at this point. Are we ever really going to be able to understand what happened? I think is the biggest thing. And I think the other thing that I guess I consistently keep thinking about is also, and people may get upset about this, but the isolation of school districts in Texas, right? And what do I mean by that? By the isolation of school districts, that you have consolidated school districts. And what consolidated school districts mean is that essentially a city or a town wanted to evade, or then wanted to be able to control what's happening. So they've separated from the larger school system, or there's been a reorganization of a school system then to isolate certain schools for a set of political reasons. And so for me, what I'm constantly thinking about is not just the gun piece, but what does this say about the nature of schooling in the state of Texas, and how that to me plays a huge role in how this timeline plays out. Because if the school system doesn't alert parents until an hour and a half later, right, or an hour and 15 minutes later, if a gunman, shows up at 11:30, 11:45, but then parents are not notified until 1:15, social media by the school district, right, who's supposed to have more control, or at least they're not on the scene, so should be able to better communicate. It just makes me think about then the overall education policy in the state of Texas, and how they have way too many school districts. I mean, in comparison, they if I'm not mistaken, they have the most school districts in than any state in the country.
Really?
And they're not the most populous state. California is. So it just, to me, that's where I'm thinking, if that makes any sense from a political policy landscape, is the nature of these school districts and the political nature of these school districts. How has that played a direct role in the safety of these children?
Right. And also, for me, I mean, just years ago, I forgot, it was I don't know if she was elected, she wasn't an elected official, but she was forgot her name, but she said, when you lose the moral authority in the world, you basically are a slippery slope, or as they say, a slippery slope to hell, and gasoline draws.
And gasoline draws.
And I'm gonna sit back. I'm sitting back and looking at the moral appeals that are going on, the legislative pushes that are going on, and the challenges in terms of how can what does gun reform look like? And this, I'm telling you, Joe Biden, if he didn't look like a senior before, because he was all polished, he's gonna look like a raggedy old man, or as Cat Williams says, weekend at Bernie's, by the time all of this is over with. Because you want to talk about somebody who has a bad card, deal, that's going on in the midst of these midterm elections. But we'll see, because there was a heavy lean, right? They were like, the Republicans are going to blow it out. But with this happening, they're like, oh no.
I think this totally changes political tide.
Yes.
This totally changes the political tide, and it gets folks that are not voting activated, I think. Mm-hmm. Because we already know there's normally a drop off when it comes to midterm elections. But I think, let me say it to you this way, because I can't speak to abroad. What I do know is I've had more conversations at this point about needing a voter summit or a civic engagement or a voter informational through the research center that I run at Southern. I've had more of those conversations in the last week based upon these series of racial incidents than I have even been able to get traction at the university.
Yeah, that's good to know. I have had conversations of people who are not 100% invested in the voting process, that have been activated to do a lot of work in the community, because as these racialized incidents are happening, there is this exorbitant amount of poverty, and people are literally starving. They're getting kicked out of their houses. So there is this post-pandemic decline that is happening in the communities.
Yeah,
and me
being the report today that the average rent across the country has now quote unquote leveled out at $2,000.
Right. Well, let me tell you this, being headquartered in Newark, New Jersey, the median income, this is in a New Jersey, Newark is a 25-minute drive from New York. The average, rents are going for like $2,100, $2,200. The median income is $32,000, between $30,000 and $32,000. There's a serious issue. And let me say this is connected to the police, the response of how police are going to be held accountable. There was this oversight commission that happened in Los Angeles about the Los Angeles County sheriffs. and the deputy gangs that they have. They also have deputy gangs throughout California and also in other states, but it's notorious in California. So this unveiling of police is also happening. And at this commission, when there was time for the community members to talk, a man got on there who said he had been incarcerated for 20 years for a crime he did not commit. And he said, if you don't do anything, this country is going to blaze. So there needs to be some action. That's all I got to say. But we're going to stay on this. We're going to stay as much as we can on the pulse of the people and what matters to the people on Arc Republic. We do have that commitment. You gave such an excellent breakdown and you asked some really great questions. They will be answered because the truth will always reveal itself. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, as usual.
Let's embark on the Arc Republic to hear current news that's published. More than gossip and chatter, covering current affairs that matter. We talk issues with professional views, all keeping you in queue. We wanted a higher vibe for these days and times to free the voices and minds, reporting the sign of the times so all can build. Let's shine, yeah.